guys, welcome back. At this point, I think it's safe to say that a lot of fans are still pretty satisfied with Halo Infinite's campaign. I'd say, on the whole, most people really enjoyed it. However, that doesn't mean that it was perfect. In the months since its release, I've seen fans of Halo's lore specifically discussing things that were absent and maybe some elements of a narrative that should have been present. And so, that got me thinking. With the more simple, kind of soft reboot approach that 343 took with this game, was Halo Infinite's campaign a disappointment for lore fans? Well, today I thought it'd be kind of fun to discuss this because I have quite a few thoughts both in favour of this and against this, so let's begin. The first thing that I've seen some people say that they were kind of disappointed in was the lack of kind of connections and references to the Primordial or Mendicant Bias or the Palace of Pain or kind of that entire era of Halo's canon. Now, Zeta Halo's rich and dark and disturbing history is easily one of its biggest selling points as a setting, but I'll be honest, it did feel like this history was mostly glossed over in the game, besides the occasional passing observation by the weapon, in favour of totally new lore that never existed prior, mostly regarding the Endless. The game did have that kind of creepy, disturbing element that the setting of Zeta Halo is so notorious for, but it wasn't the Primordial's time lock, or the Palace of Pain, or flood containment facilities, or remnants of Tudesa tribes. Instead, it was a species that the Foreigners hid from the galaxy that, for all intents and purposes, didn't exist at all in the canon before Halo Infinite that just happened to be contained on the ring. Now, I'm gonna be honest, this was a pretty big disappointment for me, and it's something that I kind of regret not going into more detail about in my review. With the open world structure of the game, the potential was infinite, yes, I said it, for just randomly stumbling across secret underground flood containment facilities in the open world, or finding unmarked foreigner facilities that bear strong resemblance to the Palace of Pain. Just things like that, Easter eggs that tie into Zeta Halo's deep and disturbing past, and I really feel like that potential, at least in the base campaign, was kind of squandered. I am definitely disappointed at the lack of Easter eggs that reference this era of the galaxy. Of course, we did have the Flood Silex, which I still love. That was a fantastic Easter egg. And also some of the audio logs as well, they definitely hinted at some stuff. But that was kind of it. Like I said, where were the unmarked flood research facilities that don't show up on your map or anything, that you just find by chance in the world? Or references to the human tribes that once lived on the ring, or references to Mendicant Bias and Faber and Primordial and their time on the ring and what they did. There was definitely a lot of potential that wasn't tapped into there. However, with that said, we do have one of the most important characters from that entire era of the galaxy, not just making its way into a game, but seemingly making its way into the main Halo narrative. Offensive Bias, which is so exciting. I mean, hell, there's even a scene from the 2020 trailer that looks a hell of a lot like Chief meeting Offensive Bias that was obviously absent from the campaign, so I have a feeling that this critique won't be one that we're gonna have for much longer. I have a lot of hope that when Offensive Bias does get brought into the main story, a lot of elements of his era of the galaxy will come with him. And that thought just gets my spine tingling, baby. Okay, so the second disappointment that I see people talking about is the fact that the Endless are claimed to be worse than the Flood. Now, I will say, just because Cortana hints at them being worse than the Flood doesn't mean that that's an objective fact. It's a very offhand statement, so she doesn't completely confirm it. But I can see 343 trying to kind of prop the Endless up as being more dangerous than the Flood to give their entrance into the canon more significance and more weight. And this is a kind of storytelling that, I'm gonna be honest, I really don't like. When stories try and like retroactively increase the stakes like this, it doesn't feel very organic. The last 20 years of Halo's canon, literally since the franchise's inception, have made it abundantly clear that the Flood are the #1 threat in the galaxy, and I mean, their very nature is to consume and contort everything, irrespective of species, of sentience, or position of power. And also, there's also the fact that they are literally the corrupted remnants of the demigods that created life itself. And I mean, the Flood was such a threat that the Foreigners deemed firing the halos and killing almost every sentient being and species in the galaxy a necessary act to stop them. I just don't see how anything could top that, especially given the lack of evidence prior to Infinite that anything like the Xalanin/Endless even existed. Of course, we did have that one Halo 1 Anniversary terminal, but that was purposefully really ambiguous. I do think that will end up, again, retroactively being altered to be Xalanin, maybe escaping from Zeta Halo, but I don't think that was the original intention, and I don't think that's what that terminal was created to kind of portray. That said though, I do understand some of the reasons as to why the Xalanin could be more of a threat than the Flood, and I think when Cortana said this, she may have been alluding to their immunity to the Halos. The Halos are like a galactic reset button. If any species is acting up, or the galaxy is in disarray or serious danger, just simply fire the Halos and problem sorted. Just reset it back to the start. But the Endless are immune to this reset button, and so in a way, I can see how they could be deemed as more powerful than the Flood, because even the Flood can be beaten by the Halos. Definitely indirectly, but they can be beaten, whereas the Xalanin, they can't be. Also, something else to keep in mind is a little thing a certain captain from another franchise that is almost under the Xbox umbrella now taught me a few years ago.
History is written by the victor. History is filled with liars. If he lives and we die, his truth becomes written and ours is lost.
And as the Endless have already proven, the Foreigners purged their records and selectively deleted information from history to hide their existence. Almost every piece of information we have in the current Halo universe about that era of the canon is basically trickled down through the Foreigners' filters, which allows them to selectively modify or delete or change certain bits of history, as we saw with the Xalanin, so there are definitely ways that they could make them more powerful than the Flood. It's just got to be executed really well. But I don't really like this being used as a narrative device to unearth a bigger secret that was there all along but was never hinted at and never had any sign of existing in any previous media. And that leads nicely into the third disappointment, and that is the fact that the Endless in general are looking to be one of those they were there all along but you just didn't know about them until now kind of story element MacGuffins. That constant escalation of tension in a narrative, having to perpetually one-up your big threat, really just ultimately ends up watering down that threat. Now, as I said a few minutes ago, this is a plot device that I strongly dislike, and every time it's used, it just reminds me of Black Ops 3 Zombies and what that game's narrative did, the damage that it did to the pre-existing narrative of Call of Duty Zombies. It basically went like this. You know, all these experiments and conspiracies and wonder weapons and perk machines and the like that you thought were the doing of Group 935, that World at War, Black Ops 1 and Black Ops 2 told you were the doings of Group 935? Well, they were actually the doing of Dr. Monty, this random guy who exists in multiple universes that had never been mentioned up until now and didn't exist in the narrative until like 2 maps ago. It really cheapened and ultimately was the spark of the downfall of Call of Duty Zombies for me. Little spoiler for my upcoming downfall of Call of Duty Zombies video right there. And I really hope that Halo doesn't go the same route with the Endless. Like I said, the narrative explanation as to why we've never heard of the Endless before does make perfect sense in the canon. Like I said, history is written by the victors. But that doesn't mean that it still doesn't seem a little bit cheap. Now, I'm not going to jump the gun here and start judging the Endless as a faction until we actually know more about them, and hell, we've not even seen what they look like yet. We're still very early days, so who knows, this might all change, and I am really excited to see what they bring to the Halo universe. But with that said, the more that I've thought about it the last few months, the more their introduction and kind of entire foundation in the canon just feels a little bit contrived. I just hope that whenever we get Halo, the Endless, or whatever comes next in the narrative, they're able to flesh the Endless out and give them enough of a history so that they don't feel like a kind of inorganic one-up insert into the canon, just so they've got something that can be more dangerous than the Flood and that can raise the stakes higher than the Flood ever did. And so that seems like a perfect point to segue briefly into today's sponsor. Good old friendly neighborhood Audible. With the Halo TV series mere days away now, I highly recommend checking out The Cole Protocol, which is not only a fantastic story, but is seemingly going to form the base of the show's narrative, and it's available on Audible right now to listen to. Or if that doesn't float your boat, how about the entire Forerunner trilogy, detailing Zeta Halo's dark and disturbing history? Or maybe Shadows of Reach, which acted as the prelude to Halo Infinite's story. There are so many Halo audiobooks to listen to on Audible, and as an Audible member, you get 1 credit every month to redeem for any title in the premium section to keep forever. I mean, who doesn't love free Halo audiobooks? And further, who doesn't love free Halo audiobooks that you can listen to while chilling, whilst gaming, or whilst working out? Who doesn't love that? So, if you want to dive into the Halo TV show more prepped than Master Chief was to give the Covenant back their bomb, or if you just want to dive into their grand archive of Halo audiobooks, then sign up for a free 30-day Audible trial today by going to audible.com/HiddenXperia or by texting HiddenXperia to 500-500. That's audible.com/HiddenXperia or text code HiddenXperia to 500-500. Cheers to Audible for continuing to bless us with grand wealths of Halo knowledge, and let's get back to the video. So, disappointment number 4 is that Halo Infinite's story wasn't a direct continuation of Halo 5's story. There were no Prometheans, no Guardians, barely any mention of the created or any other created AI besides Leonidas, and also no mention of what happened to all of these AIs after Cortana was defeated on Zeta Halo. Now, given how galvanized the created AIs were to the created cause, surely Cortana dying would have kind of created a power vacuum that would be filled by another AI in the kind of organization. Is it really an organization? It's more of a cult, to be honest with you. Which in turn would have allowed the created to continue to exist. You would have assumed that that power vacuum would have been filled. These are all very valid points, and I do think the created kind of just vanishing, given how galvanized they were, is a little bit odd. However, that said, for me personally, Infinite struck the perfect balance between continuing Halo 5's plot and also kind of moving away from that story into something more interesting. I do think Cortana going out to save Chief when she realized that Atriox had defeated him made sense. I mean, it was in line with her goals in Halo 5, right? At the end of Halo 5, she wanted to put Chief in the Cryptum for like 10,000 years so that he could be safe until her work was done. At no point did Cortana ever see Chief as a direct enemy, or even worse, want to kill him, so her going out the way that she did to ensure he survived did make sense. The only thing that didn't make sense, like I said, is what happened to the rest of the created AIs. Although I think that's going to be a plot point that will end up getting tied up in one of the many Halo books coming out over the next year or so, because I think 343 know that a lot of people were not a fan of that story, so I don't think they really want to market a game or a DLC around it. And kind of as an extension of that disappointment, the next one, disappointment number 5, which sounds a bit weird to say, is that they seemingly sidelined, or likely temporarily sidelined, major characters from recent stories, particularly from the Reclaimer era. Now, I'm going to be honest, this is definitely something that I felt throughout the campaign, but honestly, I saw it as a necessary evil after Halo 5's overly cluttered mess of like a 15-character lineup just to tell a more concise story. Because of the smaller cast in Halo Infinite, characters were able to be fleshed out a lot more, and they got a lot more screen time than most of the ones in Halo 5, and it made for a more compelling Chief-focused story that rounded up many plot threads from Halo 4 and Halo 5 simultaneously. That said though, like I've said in many videos before, I do hope that that kind of smaller cast of characters is something that ends with the main campaign, and as we get DLCs in the future, they start to open us up to the wider Halo universe again, reintroducing characters like Arbiter, like Lasky, like Palmer, etc, etc. My hope in this regard is that Infinite's campaign DLCs kind of act like the Halo 2 to the base campaign's Halo 1, if that makes any sense. So, Halo Combat Evolved set the stage for the Halo universe with a relatively simple foundational story that set up the good guys and the bad guys and the main plot elements of the franchise. And then, Halo 2 came along and massively expanded on that narrative. And my hope is that Infinite's campaign DLCs basically do that. My biggest fear right now is that my favorite Halo character of all time, the Arbiter, gets relegated to being a book-only character now, because he has a book coming out, I think, later this year / next year called Halo Outcasts, which is basically about him and Olympia Vale. But I just hope that with the kind of simple story thing with Halo Infinite's campaign, that doesn't mean that Arbiter has been relegated to being an expanded universe only character. Please get Keith David back to play Arbiter in another game, a spin-off game, or future DLCs for 4.3. I am begging you. And the final disappointment is something that I've seen a lot of people talking about, and I think it's just people interpreting things completely incorrectly, but we're going to cover it anyway, because I've seen some people talking about it and been like, that's kind of stupid, and if it were true, I would agree, but I don't think it is. And that is the fact that there are kind of rumblings and hints that the Endless have some sort of time-traveling abilities. Now, I will admit, there are quite a few references to time and spatial distortion, both in main dialogue in the game, and also I think there are some in Despondent Pyre's audio logs as well, so there may possibly be something to it, but I don't think people need to worry about like real Terminator-style time travel becoming a part of Halo's main canon. Two of the biggest examples are the first one being in the legendary ending when Despondent Pyre says, "Time is not a construct that we can control," and then the Grand Edict replies saying, "Then we cannot allow it to be theirs." Now people think that that means that the Foreigners were trying to stop the Endless from being able to control time, which is true, just not in a literal sense. By this, at least my interpretation, is that the Grand Edict means that because the era of the Foreigners ruling the galaxy and holding the mantle is about to be over, remember this cutscene takes place after the firing of the Halos, that means that they cannot rule the galaxy anymore for millennia on end, but also they can't allow the Endless to do so either in their stead. It's quite hard to explain, but think of it less about them controlling time literally in like a tangible manner, and more about it being like a figurative statement. They can't allow the Endless to rule the galaxy, and in doing so, kind of rule that time span itself, if that makes any sense. That is, I'm not gonna lie, that's really hard to explain. And the second thing is when the Harbinger, in her final boss fight, is sending a signal to reveal the location of the Endless to Atriox, and the weapon says that the signal is old, really old, and people took this to mean that she was sending the signal back in time because Atriox had also been sent back in time to get the Endless, but I don't think that's the case at all. I think more so what this means is that because the containment facility that the Endless are in is really old, created, like I'd assume, before the Halos were even fired, then the signal that the Harbinger is sending to Atriox in the present day to unlock them must also be old, because I'm assuming that signal also acted as like a key to unlock the facility, and that key would have to be as old as the facility itself, right? So hopefully that makes sense. There's also one more thing as well. At the very end of the game, when Chief and the weapon jump in the portal to get away from the Silent Auditorium, and when they arrive at that desert area, the pilot says they've been missing for like 3 days, and people were like, oh, they time traveled. No, I don't think that's the case at all. That was essentially like a mini slipspace portal, and slipspace takes a lot longer than the games make it seem. I'm pretty sure it's either in Halo 2, when the Inamberclad goes from Mombasa to Delta Halo, or Halo 3 when the Dawn goes from Earth to the Ark, one of the two, but that space in between either Metropolis and Delta Halo or Floodgate and the Ark is 2 weeks long, but the game doesn't make you feel like it's 2 weeks long. Slipspace takes a lot longer than people think. So yeah, this disappointment, I'm gonna be honest, I don't feel it. I don't really agree with it. I think a lot of people are getting like worried, like, oh, they're gonna add time travel to Halo now, but I just think people are looking at these lines in more of like a literal way when you should be interpreting them in a more figurative way. So, in conclusion, was Halo Infinite's campaign a disappointment for lore fans? Obviously, the answer to that is very subjective. People are going to think differently either way, but for me personally, no, it wasn't. I think the Infinite story set up a lot of really great stuff. There are definitely some things that I would have loved to have seen included that were absent and feel like a lot of lost potential, but with that said, I can see those things definitely being inserted in future campaign DLCs or something like that. So, what did you think? Did you think that Halo Infinite's campaign satisfied all of your lore needs, or was it a massive disappointment that didn't touch on any elements of the lore that you wanted it to? Let me know down below in the comments. And with that said, I'm going to round this one out here. I want to give a massive thank you to my amazing patrons for the continued support over there, as per usual. and thank you all so much for watching, I really appreciate it, and I'll catch you all in the next one.